We'll be in the Judges just for a few minutes, then we're going to get out. We'll be going over to the seventh word, the word united. This is our fourth lesson in the book of Judges. United will be the one we get to in just a second. We're discussing Samuel, who was the last judge of Israel. He was a good man, but proved to be not a very good father. And even though his sons were corrupt, he permitted them to serve in a spiritual capacity. And that contributed to the disgust of the people. They wanted a king rather than a judge. They didn't want his sons to reign over them. But that wasn't the only reason. The primary reason was that they wanted to be like the people around them, which we discussed last week is a problem we experience today. We're not, our services are, by modern standards, are on the bland side. We worship God, or try to, the way He's told us to. And the way God has told us to doesn't titillate people like some of the modern innovations do. Well, these other groups, they're getting a lot of people that come where we don't. And a lot of our brethren throughout the world, in order to draw more people, I suppose you'd say, they cave to what the other groups are doing and start incorporating some of those features into their worship services. Well, this is what the Israelites wanted. They wanted to be like the other nations around them. They had a king. There was a lot of pomp and ceremony that goes along with a king. They wanted a human man to reign over them. And that was actually the beginning of their end. The first thing that can happen, the worst thing that can happen, is human government. Whenever there's human government, there's always going to be the destruction of a nation. And there's a simple reason for that. Wherever there's that much power and money, that's where the crooks go. Ultimately, that's what's going to happen. It's not, it's not something that's new. It's been that way since the beginning of time. Leaders, corrupt people always get into the leadership, and because of their lack of values, they always lead the nation into oblivion. And that's what's happening to Israel. They think they're making a good move, but in reality they're not. They're making a very bad move. Their great-great-grandchildren are going to suffer horrifically because they are switching from a divine government to a human government. And this is what God tried to tell them. He said the worst thing you can do is have a government. You don't want a human government. Now, I know God has appointed governments over the nations, but that's not the ideal situation. The ideal situation is God govern a nation. And the only nation God governs today is His nation, His kingdom. We are a nation of God. He is our king. We don't want to remove God as king and receive human kings. But this is what actually happens. Rather than listening to God, sometimes people will listen to people. And that's always the beginning of the end. We watch it in Israel. It's fascinating to watch over the next several hundred years as the nation self-destructs. But right here is the beginning point, right there. When they go from God being their king to a human king, that's the beginning of their undoing, in spite of what God tries to do to save them. When Samuel became old, he made his sons judges over Israel. We discussed this last week, but we got to go over it to get into the next section. His sons did not walk in his ways. They loved money. And for money's sake, they took bribes. They perverted justice. Well, the elders of Israel come together. They talk to Samuel at Ramah. Behold, you are old. you're going to die. And when you do, because your sons do not walk in your ways, they're going to come in and take your place. Therefore, appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nation. A broken-hearted Samuel, as we discussed, prays to God. God, they have rejected me. And the Lord said to Samuel, obey the voice of the people in all that they say to you. They have not rejected you. They have rejected me from being king over them. And this is what happened. Today, if we, as a congregation, if we resort to modern ways in order to be a growing and thriving and living church, or whatever we want to think of it, what we are doing is removing God as our king and accepting for ourselves human kings, men, whoever they are. And that's what we really don't want to do. Right now, God is our king. He tells us what to do. He tells us how to worship, for example. When we go through our various steps of worship, we're trying to the best of our ability to do exactly what our king has told us to do. Now, if we deviate from what our king has said, the reality is we have rejected our king in heaven, and we are accepting a human king, whoever makes the innovations or the changes. This is what Israel did. This is a lesson of history that we're to learn from today, and we can make the very same mistake. And that's what we don't want to do. Samuel felt like it was he who was being rejected because they didn't like his boys, which was partially true. But ultimately, the real reason was that they didn't want God to reign. They didn't want to do God's way anymore. They wanted to change it. They wanted to spice it up, man. They wanted to make it better, more appealing, something they liked better. And God told them, he said, man, if you do this, if you appoint for yourself a king, he's going to draft your sons, he's going to draft your daughters, he's going to tax the daylights out of you. I mean, you're going to get hit so hard, your life is going to be horrible. And they said, well, listen, we heard what you had to say, fine, yeah, we want a king. And this is where Samuel and God have this conversation. The Lord said, they just don't want me to reign over them. They were tired of the ways of God, and they wanted to spice it up. And that was the problem, and today we see sometimes that is still the problem. We want to do it different than what God said. Well, that's what we're going to try not to do. We're going to try to the best of our ability to stick with what the Lord has told us to do. Colossians 3:17, whatever you do in word or deed, do all because Jesus has authorized you to do it. And to the very best of our ability, that's what we try to do. Perfect, hardly, but we're trying to make our king happy. And that's what we want to do. The warnings about the king, chapter 8, verses 10 through 18. People refused to obey the voice of Samuel. No, there shall be a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, that our king may judge us, go out before us, and fight our battles. They've got God fighting their battles. I mean, these people are nuts. They've won battles that were impossible to win. And now they don't want God to be their commander-in-chief. They want a human king to be their commander. It's foolish to the nth degree. But this is what they chose for themselves. And in spite of what God knew was going to happen, they wanted it, and the Lord gave it to them. And as I said, that's going to be the beginning of their end. The Lord said to Samuel, obey their voice, make them a king. And Samuel told the people of Israel, go home. Everybody go to his house. I will appoint a king when God selects one. Of course, God already knew who his king would be, but he hadn't revealed that to Samuel yet. And that brings us to our seventh word, the word united, which I cheat on that one, really means United Kingdom. But we'll be studying about that for a little while. there's going to be the United Kingdom. There's a difference between the United Kingdom and the divided kingdom. The United Kingdom is when all 12 tribes are in harmony. They're all under the leadership of one king. There's 3 kings altogether. There's going to be Saul, then there's going to be David, then there'll be Solomon, his son. And then because Rehoboam, Solomon's son, is not too smart, he caused a great division to occur. 10 of the tribes separated from Judah and Benjamin, and then we go into the divided kingdom. But right now we'll study the appointment and the reign of Saul, David, and Solomon under this first word. And those are the sections where the United Kingdom is discussed in your Bible. The man that didn't want to be king was Saul. God chose him to be king. He didn't want the job. When Samuel saw When Samuel saw Saul, the Lord told him, "Here is the man of whom I spoke to you. He it is who shall restrain my people." God had picked this fellow Saul. Out of everybody in Israel, God wanted Saul to be the king. Saul was everything the people wanted. He knew what they wanted, and he gave them what they wanted. Saul was the type of a human that the people were looking for. And Saul answered Samuel when he was told, you're going to be the king of Israel. What? I'm a Benjamite. It's the smallest tribe of Israel. Is not my clan the humblest of all the clans of the tribe of Benjamin? I'm from the smallest tribe. I'm from the smallest clan in the smallest tribe. Why then have you spoken to me this way to be king? Saul defeats the Ammonites in his first battle. He's appointed king. I'm going to skip over this pretty quick. I want to show you his beginning, his humility, because with time he's going to change. Okay, he started out, he looked like a pretty good man, at least humility-wise. We get to chapter 11. Saul has been ordained king. People don't know it yet, but he has been ordained king. Samuel ordained him when he met him. But now Saul takes it upon himself to fight the Ammonites, who are persecuting the Israelites. They don't have a leader. Saul's going to take that spot. The kingdom is then renewed. Saul and the army he mustered defeated the Ammonites. The kingdom has come back together. They were divided. They were separated. They had a judge. They wanted a king. And now they've got a leader, Saul, who is going to lead them to very great things. And the kingdom is renewed. And now all the people is going to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal. He was already king. The people just didn't know it. There they sacrificed peace offerings before the Lord, and there Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly. So Israel has her first king, and that is the man Saul, from a humble beginning. Well, Saul now is going to fight with the Philistines. He's got God on his side. He's got priests. He's got Samuel the prophet that advise him. The priests and the prophets and the judge, such as Samuel, they communicate with God, and then they tell the king. The priest is the religious side, and then the king is the secular side. So when Saul wants something, he goes through the priest or through Samuel, communicates with the Lord, and then they tell him what the Lord says, and then he acts on what they tell him. So he's acting on instructions from the Almighty God. In chapter 13, he goes to war with the Philistines, and they mustered to fight with Israel. There were 30,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen, and troops like the sand on the seashore in multitude. Now imagine the numbers of the Philistine army. That's a massive army that's gathered together to fight Israel. When the men of Israel saw that they were in trouble, for the people were hard pressed. Their army wasn't very big, and wow, look at the size of this army. They hid themselves in caves and holes and rocks and tombs and cisterns. They were afraid of the Philistines. Israel was trembling at the sight of this massive army. And some of the Hebrews even crossed the fords of Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. Well, Saul was still at Gilgal, and all the people followed him trembling. He's got a mess on his hands. He's going to fight. God has told him to fight the Philistines. Well, the Philistines come with this massive army. And his army, it doesn't even start out very well. And now everything's starting to fall apart. He's got a mess on his hands. Well, his unlawful sacrifice. What happened was Saul was told to wait for 7 days. And then Samuel would show up before he fought the Philistines. You go to Gilgal, you wait for Samuel. When Samuel comes, he's going to offer a sacrifice. You got to offer a sacrifice to God before they could go into battle. Well, Saul waits his 7 days. Day 1 goes by, he's not shook up. Day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, and now he's come down to day 7. Every day his army is running away. I mean, he's watching. It's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Day by day. Saul's got to be biting his fingernails, right? His army is dissipating. The Philistine army is still growing. More and more are still coming in. And there's no sign of Samuel. He wants to get on with the battle before it's just him that's left, because the people were scattering from him. Well, Saul offered the burnt offering. You got to offer the offering to God. That was the rule. The Israelites always did it. Before they would ever engage in a battle, they would offer a sacrifice to God to have the favor of God so they would win that battle. Well, there's no Samuel. And Saul, he wants to get on with it. He's losing his army. So he takes it upon himself. I mean, he honors God to the point we have got to offer God a sacrifice. God deserves a sacrifice. So he offered God the burnt offering. And as soon as he got done, isn't that the way it always goes when you make the wrong choice? Just as soon as you do what you weren't supposed to do, bang, the right thing comes along. And that's what happened here. Saul was afraid. He had to get on with it. And as quick as he gets done with his burnt offering, here came Samuel on day 7, just like he told him he would. When Samuel came and he said, when he seen Saul there, acting like a priest, he wasn't a priest, he was a king. He was from the tribe of Benjamin. He was not a Levite. He couldn't do that. That was wrong. What have you done? What have you done, Saul? You have done foolishly. You have not kept the command of the Lord your God with which he commanded you. Now, it's easy to have empathy with Saul. He was in a pickle. His back was against the wall. From all physical appearances, he wasn't going to win the battle. And things are getting worse every day for him. But God told him to wait for Samuel on day 7, and Samuel offered the sacrifice. He waited till day 7, and he would not go into battle without offering a sacrifice to God. What happened to Samuel? Did he have a heart attack on his way up here? What happened to Samuel? Did he get mugged by a bunch of robbers? What happened to Samuel? Did the Philistines take him? How many things could have gone wrong? There had to be hundreds of things that was going through this man's mind, one after the other after the other. But he had enough respect towards God that he would not engage in a battle without offering the sacrifice. And Samuel said, "You've done a foolish thing." Why? You didn't do what God told you to. You should have waited. One of the big lessons that we learn in the Bible, and it's pointed out crystal clear, is to wait on the Lord. You got to wait. Even when it doesn't look like the right thing to do. You got to wait. And by that I mean you've got to keep the commandment of the Lord. For example, when the Israelites were backed up against the Red Sea, they had nowhere to go. They had to wait on the Lord until the Lord made them a way of escape. Over and over and over in the Bible, that's one of the great lessons that's taught. One thing that God is prone to do with his people is wait till the last minute, the climatical moment, and suddenly he swoops in and saves the day. That's not uncommon. You got your back against the wall. You're going to lose everything you've got. There's no, if you don't do something, you're going to be penniless. And we do what we're not supposed to do. What the Bible is teaching us over and over again throughout the Old Testament is to trust God and wait for him to dig us out of our hole. And he always waits to the last minute. That's one of the most fascinating things of all. I pointed it out several times in our study so far, but here's another example of it. Day 7, maybe it's getting late in the day, I don't know. At any rate, Saul jumped the gun. He couldn't wait any longer. He broke God's command. He did what Samuel would have done, except that he was the wrong guy to do the job. And because he disobeyed God, the consequences of his decision that day, that decision is going to change the course of his life throughout the rest of his life. He'll never know another day of peace. Your kingdom shall not continue, Saul. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart. God was looking for a man that would obey him. That's what he wants. That's what he wanted. He wants people that will obey him. Yeah, the situation didn't look good. But you're supposed to wait because God said so. One time, a person asked me, as a preacher actually, he said, you people, you don't use pianos or organs or any of that stuff. And I said, well, yeah, no, we don't. He said, why? I said, well, the Lord didn't tell us to. And he said, do you have to be told everything that you do? And I thought about it a second. I said, yeah, that's what we're supposed to do. Whatever the Lord says, we do no less, we do no more. That's what we learn from the Scriptures, and that's also what we're taught in explicit statements, is always to do only what God said. And Saul proved not to be the kind of man God was looking for. He wanted a man after his own heart, and Saul wasn't that guy. Saul, even though Saul had the appearance of meekness and humility, and he probably was a meek and humble man, but when the opportunity came, Saul showed who he really was. That happens a lot of times, doesn't it? You know, sometimes I've been amazed. I know a lot of preachers, you know, and sometimes I've been amazed by preachers who have began preaching, and they seem like such exceptional people, godly as you would hope for in a preacher, and because of their godliness, their goodness, and their ability to communicate the will of God to people, they became popular. People got to know who they were, and the more people exalted them, you know, they would bring them in and hold a lot of gospel meetings and all this stuff. And the more these fellows were exalted by their brethren, the bigger their head got, okay? Their head swelled. And what began as a meek and humble man with all the traits of godliness, he became a self-righteous man over the process of time. And I've thought about that a lot. And I've asked myself the question, was the fellow truly humble in the beginning, or was he a self-righteous man? And I believe that even though all the marks of humility were there, he was actually a self-righteous man. But he didn't have the opportunity to show his true colors. Sometimes it takes opportunity before we can show who we really are. And that's what happened here with Saul. Because Saul is a very complex man to me. Such a great beginning, and suddenly he took upon himself to disobey God and assume the role of a priest, which was really bad. And why? Well, it's because he was the king. He was the king. And the king could make decisions like that, or so he thought. But Saul wasn't really the man after God's heart. He didn't really trust God. He didn't wait on God. He was more about self-exaltation than he was in glorifying the God of heaven. And this is what's implied in that statement. Samuel said the Lord was looking for a man after his own heart, Saul, and you're not that guy. Because I was troubled by the fact that he lost his kingdom over one fracture. It's one fracture. And the kingdom is ripped out of his hand. What about David? David committed adultery with Bathsheba and then had her husband and whoever else was with him murdered by setting them up for certain death in a battle. But God didn't take the kingdom away from David. There was obviously a difference between these two men. Even though David committed a horrible crime, horrible by our system of thinking, much worse than what Saul did. Even though he committed such a terrible sin, he was still a man after God's heart. He really was. He got off track for a little bit. He followed his carnal passions. He committed a sin. But in reality, the truthfulness of the matter was, more than anything, he loved God. But Saul didn't. That's not what Saul was all about. It just took the right opportunity to bring out the true colors of Saul. You got any reflections on that? That's kind of philosophical, but it's what they wanted. It's what the people wanted. Saul was big man. You pick a leader, a big man, and that's what Saul was. The kings generally would go out in battle before their armies. So they usually had big, huge kings or pharaohs or whatever. They were usually very large men because people feel safe when a large man is present. And Saul, he had all the physical features of a king. I mean, he was a pretty king. And the people, that's what they were looking for. A king like the other nations had. A king they could be proud of. When their king stood next to another king, they could say, that's my king. Look at that dude, boy, he's massive. So God gave the Israelites what they wanted, even though he knew that was wrong. But they insisted. And that's another thing we ought to learn. Sometimes we want something and we don't need it, but we think we do. And we insist on having it over and over. We insist on having it. And we keep pushing and pushing and pushing the Lord. We can push to the point where he'll let us have it, only to discover that's not what we really wanted. Let me give you this. I know a lot of people have heard it before, but if I don't talk about me, I got to talk about you. You want me to talk about you? Nah, I ain't going to do that. I was up for a job promotion one time. I went back to school. I got a certain amount of education that I needed for a particular job advancement that I was wanting. I was the most qualified person for it. I'm not bragging, that's just the truth. I was the most qualified person for that job. I prayed to God, I wanted the job. There was a big boost in salary. And I didn't get the job, and I was sad. I felt like the Lord let me down. I was doing everything I could to please God. I had a job, but I was preaching also full time. I was doing everything I could that I thought my God wanted me to do. And here I want a bump in my salary so my BR can stay home with my children and not have to go out and get a job. Because, one salary back then, it didn't go too far. And we could get by, but it was tough. And I begged and begged and begged. I felt like I was entitled to it. I didn't get the job. Well, I got over it. I didn't push the matter anymore. Didn't understand it, but I didn't push it. See, Ted knows the end. A lot of you do. It was about 6 months later, maybe 9 months, maybe even a year. I'm not really sure anymore. My mind's out there now. But eventually, in the course of time, that job, that position was eliminated. And the person who held that position was also eliminated. If I had gotten that job, I'd have been out of a job. Now, I'd have made more money for a few months, whatever it was, but in the long run, I would have been out of a job with the company that I actually still work for. Technically, I do. The Lord knew it. I did not. And I've often wondered, had I provoked him enough, had I been, a real whiner over it, if he would have given me what I wanted and showed me on another occasion that I don't always need what I want. And that's a lesson we have to learn. It gets easier as you get older. When you're young, it's hard. Wow. It's hard for me to understand it. I hear preachers say it, and I believe they were telling the truth the best they knew it. I just wasn't so sure they were right. But trust me, that's what they used to tell me. This is the way it works. Sometimes we want something, and the Lord won't let us have it because we really don't need it. It's going to be bad for us. That's what God told the Israelites. You do not want a king. You don't. You really don't want a king. And they wouldn't have it. So he gave them the king they wanted, which was Saul. Saul fit the man. When they saw Saul, wow, they went crazy over Saul because he was the ideal specimen for that job. But now he's lost his kingdom. Why? He doesn't love God. That's the problem. He doesn't love God. Had he have loved God, he wouldn't have done what he did, or if he had done what he did, he would have repented of it. But he wouldn't even do that because he thought he was right. Now, Saul was about Saul, and David was about God. Now, there was a time there when David was about David. Okay? He committed sin, lust. Lust took over. He went with lust. But that wasn't the true David. That was the exception to the rule, David. The true David was a man after God's heart who sinned, like we all do. Saul was not a man after God's heart. Saul was about Saul. He would have things his way. This isn't the first infraction. It's only the first of many. Of course, God knew what was going to happen. He knew that in future circumstances, Saul wouldn't get any better. As a matter of fact, he was going to get worse. And God knew all that stuff. And that's why he's saying, he already knows, you're not a man after my heart. Am I supposed to stop for something? Oh, okay. Let's see how far we can go. He's victorious over Israel's enemies, even though he had disobeyed God. God is still going to honor and protect his people. They do go into battle, and they win the battle, not because of their king. By the grace of God, they won that battle, like they won every battle, actually. When Saul had taken the kingship over Israel, he fought against all his enemies on every side, against Moab, against the Ammonites, against Edom, the kings of Zobah, the Philistines. Wherever he turned, he routed them. He was a man of war. He was good. He was a good warrior, and the people loved that man. And he did valiantly. He struck the Amalekites. He delivered Israel out of the hands of those who plundered them. He was, as a king, he was successful as a king. As a son of God, he was a failure. But as a king, he was successful because God supported what he was doing. Israel, the land of Canaan, had to be cleared so Israel could inhabit that land, and that's what they're doing. God rejects Saul on another occasion. Maybe I can get this in. Samuel said to Saul, "The Lord sent me to anoint you king over his people Israel, and now therefore listen to the words of the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, I have noted what Amalek did to Israel." Amalek is a nation. God calls them by name because all the nations began with an individual, like Israel began with Jacob, who was also named Israel. So a lot of times when you talked about a nation, you talked about the father of the nation, okay? I noted what Amalek did to Israel, opposing them on the way when they came up out of Egypt. They harassed the Israelites coming out of bondage. And God said, I haven't forgot what they done. And now, go and strike Amalek. Now you go take vengeance for me. And devote to destruction everything. Everything. God is angry. Do not spare them. Nobody. Kill both man, woman, child, and infant. The baby in the crib. The ox, the sheep, the camel, and the donkey. Can you imagine taking a sword and cutting a baby in half? Man, that would be tough. That would be tough. I got 2 little granddaughters. I can't even imagine somebody taking a sword, cutting them in half. But this is what God told them to do. This is what Jesus told them to do. This is Jesus. The meek, the lowly Jesus. He's the one giving them orders. How? Through human eyes, there's no way to understand it. Through human eyes, it's evil and it's vile. But in reality, the best thing that could have happened to the little children and the infants was death. It really was. Huh? That's right. They're going to go to paradise. I mean, in an instant, they're going to be transported by the angels up into Abraham's bosom. They're going to get out of that stinky Palestinian region where I would never want to live. And they're going to be transported into Abraham's bosom in the arms of the angels. Now, if those children had been allowed to grow up in Amalek, more than likely they would have lost their souls because they probably would have been pagans just like all the rest of them were. So the Lord had to destroy the infants. Why? Because the adults were going to die. And who would take care of the little children? When we look at this, it looks like such a vicious attack. But in reality, God is caring for the little people. Because the big people got to die. It's time for God to exterminate this nation. They can't exist anymore. They're too polluted. They've gone way too far. They don't deserve to live anymore. And the children got to go too, because they certainly can't fend for themselves. But in the process, it was much, much better to wake up in paradise than to wake up another night in their cots. Don't judge God harshly. From my point of view, the way I see it, the destruction of the infants and the children was actually an act of mercy. Can you imagine what it would have been like if they'd have been left to themselves? Well, they'd have been eaten by wild animals and things like that. Best thing to do is to take them also. You got to look at things through the eyes of God. There comes a point in time when a nation can lose its right to exist. When a nation becomes so sinful, a holy God can't tolerate their presence any longer. There's a line somewhere. Nobody knows where it is but God. But this is what happened to the Canaanites originally. You remember what Jehovah told Abraham? That he would inherit, his children would inherit the land of Canaan. Not today. He said the deed can't be put in your name today, Abraham. Why? Well, it's because the people they're not sinful enough. It's not the right time. But when they become so sinful, the way God said it, when their cup of iniquity is full, their cup of sin is full, then your descendants will take their land. Because then I'll instruct your descendants to exterminate them from the face of the earth. There's a line somewhere that can be crossed where you don't come back. Only thing that lies in front of you at that point is certain destruction, because the sin has just become too much for God to tolerate. And that's what's happening right here. Right there, that's what's happening. Happened a lot of times in the Old Testament. It's not an uncommon incident. And it's something we should always be mindful of.